We have been working for some time on addressing the 9 bad laws, as I like to call them, that have been impacting our investment climate here. And I'm pleased that we've reached an agreement to substantially work on removing and revising those laws. I think what it's going to do, especially with the removal of the emissions cap on Alberta, as well as the removal of the net zero power regs, I think it's going to unleash an incredible amount of investment and allow us to work together on important nation building projects. So it's the first step, I think, of what will be a few more steps we have to take together, but I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister has heard our concerns and responded to them.
Thank you very much, Premier. And look, it's a great day for Alberta. It's a great day for Canada. And at the heart of what is a multifaceted agreement, we have more work to do going forward, but a multifaceted agreement. In effect, it creates an energy transition, all aspects of energy, but really sets the stage for an industrial transformation. At the core of the agreement, of course, is a priority to have a pipeline to Asia. That's going to make Canada stronger, more independent, more resilient, more sustainable, because the way we're going to do that is in combination with the Pathways project, which will be the largest carbon capture project in the world. It'll mean that Alberta barrels of bitumen are amongst the lowest energy intensive in the world, therefore competitive not just for tomorrow, but for decades, as well as creating a whole new industry for Alberta and for Canada. In addition, agreements, or at least intentions around nuclear power, interties with other provinces, sovereign data centers, huge opportunity, huge necessity for Alberta and for Canada. And it's all done in a spirit of cooperation, partnership, and trust. So as the Premier just referenced, some adjustments to regulations, adjustments here in terms of strengthening the tier system, methane regs, enhancing methane regs, a cooperation agreement on regulation, which will help us move forward more efficiently and effectively. And also, just on the point of cooperation, at the heart of this is cooperation and partnership with Indigenous peoples in Alberta, in British Columbia, as they're affected. Unprecedented opportunities for Indigenous ownership, partnership, economic benefits, as well as substantial economic benefits for the people of British Columbia. So this is Canada working. This is cooperative federalism. This is Canada building with Alberta, building with Canada, building for today, but building very much for the future. And I'm very grateful, Premier, for your hard work and the hard work of your team to get us to this point. We've got more work to do, but we're going to work hard at doing it. Et puis en français, oh mon Dieu, juste plus fort que ça. Alors c'est un grand plaisir d'être.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be back in Alberta. I grew up in Alberta, and this is a good day for Canada and Alberta, but for Canada as well, because this agreement will make Canada and Alberta, of course, more independent, more resilient, stronger, and more sustainable. Within this agreement, there is a pipeline to Asia being proposed, but this will happen in conjunction with a new project called the Pathways project involving carbon capture, the biggest carbon capture project in the world. It's an investment for Canada and for Alberta, and the consequence of that is that we will have the lowest energy-intensive oil from Alberta and the most competitive oil, the most competitive in the world. And this will be an incredible feat. And there are other aspects as well to this agreement when it comes to nuclear energy, the connection between the provincial systems. And so we're really talking about an industrial transformation aimed at the future. And the basis of this agreement is, of course, cooperation between the federal government and Alberta, cooperation with British Columbia, and in particular, cooperation and partnership with the Indigenous peoples. This is a great opportunity, an unprecedented opportunity to ensure there are economic benefits attached to it. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but it's really a good day for Canada, because Canada is working. And cooperative federalism is working. And again, I want to thank Premier Smith for her hard work and that of her team. Thank you.
We have been listening in there to Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith as they met in Calgary. They will, in just a few minutes as well, have a signing ceremony for a memorandum of understanding, an energy agreement between Ottawa and Alberta. Now, in those remarks from the Premier and the Prime Minister, we did hear some new details of what is involved here. So cannot understate sort of the significance of some of what we've heard there. I do want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor listening in for those details that we heard specifically from Danielle Smith as well. And of course, I may have to interrupt you if that signing ceremony gets underway. Ours that I heard, regulation, removal, revival, transformation, but also Indigenous cooperation, partnership, ownership as well. A lot of details there that we actually got from Danielle Smith off the top.
Yeah, the actual embargo on this agreement, which I was able to read under embargo, it's not supposed to lift until they sign, but because they've let some cats out of the bag, I'm going to do my best not to violate the terms of the embargo while also explaining to people what they just heard these two leaders describing. Interesting to see Danielle Smith kick off her remarks by talking about the removal of the 9 bad laws. There is not an enumeration of this is how we're removing this and this is how we're removing this, although if you do go through it, probably there is some language in one form or another that meets everything that the Premier was asking for on that front. Interesting to hear the Prime Minister frame it as adjusting regulations to make this happen. Rhetorical choices, deliberate ones perhaps. As Danielle Smith alluded to in her comments there, this is an agreement that the emissions cap for the oil and gas sector will not go ahead. Now, this was kind of signaled a path for that in the federal budget. But if anyone was wondering, yes, there's language about that. She talked about net zero for Alberta in 2050. There are some who believe that 2050 is too late and wanted things that would move towards reaching net zero, particularly on things like electricity generation, much earlier than 2050. Danielle Smith had always scoffed at that. Indeed, they are looking at 2050 as the point at which Alberta hits that point in terms of its carbon emissions. And the other things that were mentioned that I think we can get into without going too far. You heard them talk about nuclear power. If you are not going to burn natural gas to generate electricity in Alberta, you do need something, because a lot of these big projects are going to be very energy intensive. So this, the Prime Minister said it wasn't just about a pipeline. Indeed, there's also a big aspect of nuclear generation to what is being laid out here. And you also heard them reference sovereign data centers. This, of course, very important for artificial intelligence and the way sort of so much in our society more and more is going to be about data centers, computing power, also something that takes a lot of electricity, I'll have be known. But this idea that Alberta would be a significant player in that and that there are tie-ins with that to what they're talking about with this pipeline. But also noting, for people who say, well, what's Alberta's economic future beyond fossil fuels? We see a play here to identify something that will probably continue to be a big part of the economy, growing, well beyond whatever you're pulling out of the ground. So that also included in this. And the other final thing, as we stare at a table that has just 2 places to sign, you think about the people who aren't at the table, or at least aren't at the table yet. And you heard a reference from the Prime Minister to how he believes there's unprecedented opportunities for Indigenous ownership here. Indeed, there's a lot of language in this MOU, I won't read it out just yet, about the idea of Indigenous ownership and Indigenous partnership. The who of it, who is the partner? What form does that take? What does that mean in terms of the money? These are the questions that spring to mind next when you start to go down that road. But that is sort of mentioned at several points, and we will get into that as the coverage continues. But this is not an agreement that includes at this point an Indigenous partner. This is an agreement signed, a memorandum of understanding signed between the federal government and Alberta, laying out how they want to then sort of expand this to include others. I guess if you're thinking about sort of other people that eventually need to be at this table but aren't yet, you would certainly have to, and I don't think I'm revealing any secrets here when I say there is still no proponent for a bitumen pipeline. I think that's well understood. This agreement seen as a precursor before anyone was prepared to step forward. At least that is Danielle Smith's articulation of it. But certainly no one at the table ready to sort of sign on with billions of private sector money yet. The other sort of player not at the table, of course, and you sort of, with the references to Alberta and landlocked Alberta and needing to get that pipeline so they can get the product to Asia and so on, you do think about the territory in the middle. As the day goes on, we're going to be talking a lot about the jurisdiction in the middle, British Columbia, and the specific language in this MOU in terms of where things go next in terms of that conversation. Again, this MOU not signaling anything yet as far as British Columbia is concerned, but laying out how they want it to work, how they're hoping it can work as far as those conversations and next steps. So I hope I haven't gotten into any trouble in terms of what I'm saying so far. But I think a lot of track laid, even in sort of that handshake, for the actual MOU that we're going to spend the rest of the day dissecting.
Well, I appreciate, of course, you had to sort of dance around, of course, that embargo, but we did hear, as you touched on there, a number of details from Alberta's Premier as we continue to wait for that signing ceremony that is scheduled to take place in about 2 minutes from now. So we will continue to watch that and, of course, bring our viewers to this scene once that takes place. I did want to ask you, because we're talking about the partnerships that were mentioned by the Prime Minister, and he talked about potential for Indigenous ownership and partnership, and he also talked about opportunity for British Columbia. Notably, you said that there's only 2 papers at that table right now, and we were discussing this morning about how that could potentially cause some conflict within his own party.
Yeah, and this is kind of the story that we, who are not in Calgary but are here in Ottawa and, with our cameras on Parliament Hill, are going to be tracking as the day goes along. Because you have to understand sort of the 2 sides that are coming together for this MOU as being 2 sides that haven't normally seen eye to eye on resource development, haven't normally worked together, have been at times warring factions. And you are taking, partisan players who have, often had a lot of sharp, pointy things to say about the other side, and asking them to come together and agree to this vision and be partners and use words like collaboration and cooperation and so on going forward. For political partisans, and elected politicians at the end of the day are that can be a lot to swallow, particularly if your identity in politics and the reason you got into politics was very much about environmental issues. There are people like that in this Liberal caucus, people who really are, as sort of some in Alberta would derisively say, the leave it in the ground kind of folks that really don't want to support this industry ever, no matter what. How do you get them to see some kind of a big picture plan where they can be okay with this, where they can agree that this is the right way to go in this country? There was the beginning of that conversation around the passage of C5 in June. This understanding that once something is declared a national interest, it's happening, and it would be the federal government saying it's going to happen, notwithstanding sort of other ways that things might have been sidetracked or derailed in the past. And the whole caucus got behind that idea, but the destination for that, or the things set in motion with the passage of that legislation includes moments like this, where sort of a memorandum of understanding is about to be signed in full knowledge that there has been no kumbaya, where everyone sort of yet stood around and agreed that this is something everybody wants. And yet, forward it goes. It is, for that reason, certainly a deliberate choice, but also a political bet on the part of both of the people signing here, who know that even on their own team, there are some people who not only are not accustomed to working with each other, but probably still have some strong feelings about how that might not be kind of what they want or what they got into politics to do. And the sell of that is only just beginning.
And, we do continue to wait here for both of the leaders, the Premier of Alberta and Canada's Prime Minister, to go to that table. It is scheduled to happen any moment now, that signing ceremony of this MOU that we are learning a few details about. And I wanted to finally also ask you about something that you did touch on, and that is the expectation that it may include an exemption from a federal ban on oil tanker traffic along BC's northern coast. And certainly we've heard some very, very definitive opposition with that. So I wanted to discuss that with you as well.
Yeah, I hope I'm not breaking the embargo if I tell you something that it doesn't say. There's no route here. Now, I don't know that anyone thought there would be. The technical kind of expert committee that the Alberta Premier has gathered of industry folks that aren't going to report until on into next year. One of the things they're contemplating is where this pipeline would actually go, what their options are, between Alberta and the coast, and where it goes kind of depends, whose buy-in you need, right? What territory are we talking about? What is the port that is the destination for this ultimately? Do you have multiple options? Is there just one? Would it necessarily be going the same way as the previous kind of failed idea? All that is ahead. How significant the objections that have been voiced so far turn out to be in the final equation may depend on where the route goes. I think we can safely sort of point that out so far. There also have been people pointing out that it's not like there are no ships whatsoever in those waters, and trying to sort of take a pragmatic approach to how you can deal with the very real concerns of a spill and the potentially devastating effects of a spill for those communities. What the mitigation is, if there is a possible mitigation for that, through technology, through sort of routing, through other things, right? Is the blanket ban really the only way? Or are there other things you can do? There are people who want to have those conversations going forward. Now, how open the First Nations are to those conversations, well, I guess as a first step, you'd need to start to have them. And what we have heard, I've been playing the clip all morning from the chief that acts as the spokesperson for the particular half dozen or so First Nations most affected, who've kind of formed that Coastal First Nations Alliance, is that conversation hasn't been started with them yet, right? So if you're thinking of this as a lot of dominoes that have to line up and fall just so in order to get to your yes and your eventual pipeline, you would certainly have to say that is work that has not been done. Right? So how significant their feelings right now are ahead of any work being done, it's a question mark. I think this is all to play out.
And Janice, we continue to wait for this, and once it takes place, I know we will go back to you and we will dissect more of the details that you have not been able to share with us just yet. Thanks for all of this. That is the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. So we continue to watch the scene in Calgary, and we'll take you there live once that signing ceremony with the Prime Minister and Alberta's Premier takes place. Meanwhile, Canada's energy future could be shifting as a result of this memorandum of understanding. Prime Minister Mark Carney is set again to sign that new energy MOU with Alberta's Premier. So the question is, could this be an olive branch to Smith and a new path for Ottawa-Alberta relations? To help us break that down, let's bring in Jitanis De Silva in Calgary. She is the former CEO of Canada Energy Regulator and a former Alberta Deputy Minister of International Relations. Thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So now the Prime Minister and the Premier of Alberta are expected to sign that energy agreement in just a few minutes. And I will interrupt our conversation if it takes place while we're talking. But I'm wondering how you believe this could reshape Canada's energy future.
Well, I think we can't understate the importance of the fact that this is actually happening. If you think back to when Premier Smith was first elected and that very awkward meeting she had with Justin Trudeau where she didn't even really want to shake his hand, the fact that Prime Minister Carney is here and they've reached agreement on an MOU, I think is really tremendous. And I think it's really important to realize, people often think of oil and gas as an Alberta issue, but 40% of the jobs in the sector are outside of Alberta, and the revenue that it generates is crucial to our GDP. So this really is a national conversation. And today's MOU could be of national benefit.
When we talk about that, we heard from the Prime Minister in his remarks as he was shaking hands with the Premier of Alberta that he sees an opportunity here for not only British Columbia, of course, a province that has been quite vocal about the potential for this project here and its opposition to it, but also for Indigenous communities. And he used the words ownership and partnership, cooperation. Has there been enough of that? And what could that look like?
Well, I think, if you look at the principles behind the Major Projects Office, it's clear there that we're also focused on Indigenous equity and partnership. And we do know that there's no fast track or shortcut around meaningful consultation. So absolutely, I think the path to yes on any major infrastructure project, not just a pipeline, going forward will need to include Indigenous equity. I know that Premier Smith did meet with one of the chiefs earlier this week. And so, she's had at least that one conversation, but obviously that direct engagement is going to be key and really will require a willingness to have difficult conversations. There are opposing views here, but that doesn't mean it is impossible to get to yes. It just means you need to engage respectfully and understand what the other side's concerns are, and then figure out where you have that common ground and how you can negotiate a path forward.
In terms of the investment that could potentially be seen here, there is, as we've been reporting, no company at this stage, no partner at this stage that has come forward saying that they want to have a stake in this, that they are a company that wants to take this on. So where does that leave things?
Well, I think, objectively, politics aside, all of the pieces of legislation and policies that were previously in place on emissions cap, a West Coast tanker ban, the clean electricity regulations, even looking at things around plastics. I know that's another issue here in Alberta, right? These are all send a signal to investors that Canada was not keen on further fossil fuel development. So if those barriers are removed, you have made the impossible possible. Now, whether it's probable, I think is still a question that needs to be answered. And so I think once investors sees what's actually in this MOU and understand a bit more about the playing field and what that will look like, and then understanding what, if any, role the Major Projects Office might play in this, I think then you might start to see some interest. I think realistically, given the amount of money that has been spent in the past on failed pipeline projects, you will likely need to see a government, a provincial government or a federal government, take some type of financial stake in a pipeline project, just to really demonstrate to the proponent that they are invested in seeing a positive outcome. So whether that's equity, whether that's financial backstop, some type of royalty scheme, I think that realistically, just given the billions that have been spent in the past to get a no, that likely industry will really be looking for some partnership from government beyond just political support, but likely I would think some level of financial engagement.
Now, I wanted to also ask, of course, about the motivation perhaps behind this. We do talk about, sort of easing the tensions between Ottawa and Alberta as potentially one of the motivating factors here. But certainly we know that the trade war, the ongoing trade war with the United States has really forced this country, the government, to sort of do a rethink of the Canadian economy and the infrastructure within this country as well. And we heard a lot of that from the Prime Minister as he was making those brief remarks, as he was shaking the Alberta Premier's hand, as he talked about an industrial transformation and about making this country much more independent as well. Right now, we know 93% of Canadian oil is sold to the U.S. So how could a new pipeline help Canada reach new markets outside of that country?
Well, you will recall that the Prime Minister also made a commitment to diversifying Canada's non-U.S. exports, to doubling those over the next 10 years, right? And that will be a big lift, as you point out, particularly when it comes to oil. Canada's largest export to the world is crude oil. And the fact that we can then get to the West Coast, increase our optionality. It means that there's the option that that oil would go to markets in Asia as opposed to just the United States. Of course, it could still go to refineries on the U.S. West Coast, but that option exists. And it's important to note that when Trans Mountain Pipeline came on, it decreased the differential between WTI and Western Canadian Select, which typically sells at a discount of $10 to $25. We get that much less per barrel of crude coming from Alberta. When Trans Mountain came on, it decreased that differential by $9. And that translated into billions of dollars. I've heard the figure $15 billion in additional royalty revenue for governments, the federal government and the provincial government. So this is important to understand. This is why this is very much a national issue, not just the fact that the jobs exist all across the country, but the royalty benefit exists. And we have to acknowledge we have an economic challenge in Canada, a fiscal challenge, a productivity challenge. And one of the fastest ways to lift our finances, in fact, to sell more raw resources. And the oil sector is one of the most productive in Canada. So just being pragmatic, there is an opportunity here, and options give you power. So if we can get our oil to different markets, it not only helps us to diversify, but also strengthens our hands when it comes to negotiating with the Americans.
I want to thank you so much for your thoughts and your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
That was Jatan De Silva. She is the former CEO of Canada Energy Regulator and a former Alberta Deputy Minister of International Relations. Thank you. And again, we continue to track the scene in Calgary, where we are expecting the Prime Minister and Alberta's Premier to sign an MOU, and that should happen any moment now, and that would be for a new energy agreement. Now, we know that creating a new oil pipeline to the West Coast has a few roadblocks to get through in order to happen, and that may be part of this MOU. There had been a moratorium that forbids tankers from transporting large amounts of crude oil across the northern coast of BC. And the CBC's Hilary Johnstone joins me now in studio to talk a little bit about that ban and Alberta's opposition to it.
That's right, because Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith has long said that she wants to see that ban repealed, because industry experts have said that there's really no point in building a pipeline to the west coast of this country if tankers can then not come into that area to take that oil and bring it to new markets, including potentially Asia. And of course, if this does get underway, Arthur, you just hop in and cut me off here. But that moratorium, that ban has been in place since 2019 under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It prohibits tankers from carrying more than 12,500 metric tons of crude oils in areas along the northern coast of British Columbia. So we're talking here from sort of the northern tip of Vancouver Island all the way up to that border with Alaska. Now, British Columbia's Premier David Eby has said that he wants that tanker ban to remain in place because he is concerned that if it's removed, that it could upset what he has called a fragile consensus in his province over resource development. He's spoken about the fact that he actually wants to strengthen that consensus rather than doing anything that might hamper it or might damage it. Certainly, in terms of whether or not we're going to see that today in the MOU, we will have to wait and see. Canada's Energy Minister and Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson just on Monday said that the government was close to providing some sort of clarity on all this, but we will have to wait and see. And certainly some of those coastal First Nations communities, Arthi, have also also been opposed to having that tanker ban removed. So whether or not this happens, we'll have to see, and what happens after all of that, we'll also have to wait and see. You can imagine that if it was removed, there'd be a lot of reaction.
And Hillary, I'm going to take our viewers now to Calgary. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith sitting down for the signing ceremony of this MOU. Let's listen in.
All right, so the way we've done this before, Doug is sign in and look up.
Okay, you want to sign and look up?
Yeah.
They won't be able to tell if it's just a photo, but it's
All right.
There we go. Good penmanship. Lost art.
Excellent.
You do the Trump.
Is that how he does it?
I think you got a little thumbs up.
He reads his signatures too.
Yeah.
Do you want to stand and do it?
Okay, that's it. My work's done for the day.
I don't know if you've met my other ministers here as well.
You know, Minister, what
I
was that?
certainly do. So nice. Thank you so much.
We have just been watching the signing ceremony that took place of this memorandum of understanding for an energy agreement between the federal government and the province of Alberta. We'll continue to watch here and listen in the event that something more is said. Of course, this agreement may carve out some special exemptions for Alberta in order to pursue a pipeline, which would be a priority. We heard from the Prime Minister leading up to this. But without further ado, I do want to get to the CBC's Janice McGregor, as she joins me now from Ottawa, and I believe now the embargo is lifted.
We're good to
Is
go.
it? Okay, let's get the details then, Janice. You've had a chance to go through it.
Yeah, indeed. And interesting to hear the Prime Minister joke that his work is done. I can tell you, if you read through this thing, there is so much work left to do. But this is intended to be the roadmap for doing it. There's a list of things here that Alberta agrees to, a list of things that the federal government agrees to, and then a list of things that they agree to do together. I'm going to cherry pick a bit some things that I think are newsiest, and then we can pull back and talk big picture. But some things that caught my eye right away. I don't think it's a surprise to see that Alberta's commitment in the top bullet point is very much about sort of getting that bitumen pipeline to allow for the sale of that resource to Asian markets. But at several places in this document, it talks about offering the opportunity for Indigenous co-ownership and other forms of economic benefits. We do not have a private sector proponent for this pipeline that is envisioned with this MOU, but this is some pretty clear language at several places in the document that it wouldn't just be one corporation building this thing, that indeed a co-owner, a partner, would be Indigenous group, fund, First Nation, TBD, from Alberta, from BC, from somewhere else, unclear, not specified. But the idea of Indigenous co-ownership of this resource development push, very much front and center at several points in the document. There is among the things that Alberta commits to is a collaboration with British Columbia to share the financial benefits of the pipeline. I think that is really politically interesting. This idea that BC wouldn't be the one giving, and Alberta be the one gaining from this. This idea that if it goes through BC's jurisdiction, that there would have to be something in it for British Columbia for hosting that pipeline. Very interesting. What that means, not specified, TBD. Under the list of what Canada commits to, I want to read out this bullet because it certainly, I think, is one that everyone grabbed their highlighter when they saw it. I'll just read it straight up. It says, declare that an Alberta bitumen pipeline to Asian markets as a priority that offers opportunities for Indigenous co-ownership and economic benefits is a project of national interest and can be referred to the Major Projects Office for consideration of designation under the Building Canada Act. This means that even though we haven't had sort of a bitumen pipeline on the first sort of two lists so far, very much a statement that we could now read this as being among the priority projects. There is a deadline here of July 1st for actually the plan being submitted, which of course they can't kind of put it to the Major Projects Office until they actually have the plan, and they're still working on the plan. But it kind of de facto inclusion on the list now based on this language. And with the idea that it would be designated under the Building Canada Act, you might say that this is even stronger than the referrals that we've seen so far. Why does it matter to be designated under the Building Canada Act? Well, that, of course, those are the powers passed in late June that allows the federal government to take extraordinary steps to fast-track things, whether it is, working through what would otherwise be against the law, whether it would be to sort of force the hand of a reluctant player. So that language, I think, very interesting. The timelines on this. Saying that they want to come to an understanding on how carbon pricing in Alberta is going to work on or before April 1st. That seems very quick. Mark Carney likes to move at speed, but it also suggests that they haven't yet worked that out, that this is still something they're going to be doing. Similarly, a methane equivalency agreement on or before April 1st. More work to be done on the Pathways project. Now, this is the other thing that's really interesting. Pathways, of course, that's the carbon capture and storage ambition, if you will, for the industry to have lower emission product down the road because they are taking the carbon out of it first. That has already been referred to the Major Projects Office, but there's language here that sort of, with two consecutive bullet points, says one will not proceed without the other, and then in the next bullet point says the other will not proceed without the one. That they're very much chicken and egg. The industry agrees that Pathways, its carbon sequestration, capture and storage project, won't go ahead unless you give us the pipeline. But on the other hand, the pipeline won't go ahead unless you give us, the technologies that would mean that this could be, some of the lowest emissions for oil in the world, as the Prime Minister has expressed that ambition. So that very interesting. Also, and this is something that came up in the technical briefing, but isn't actually in the document if folks are just getting their hands on it and reading it at home. But a spokesperson from the Alberta government side of the table, in terms of when there'd actually be shovels in the ground, they said we should be able to say that the goal here is to do that by 2029. Now, if you understand the business and the complexity of all of this, that's pretty quick. That's pretty quick. And the power to generate it, the nuclear part of this play, the nuclear power generation strategy to be finalized before January 1st, 2027. Again, something super quick. And the policy framework for AI data centers, that other aspect of this, the diversification aspect of this, if you will, for Alberta that I was mentioning, that to be finalized before July 1st of next year. So just imagine all the work involved in that. Finally, just two quick other points here. People wondering, is there any money mentioned in this? Is there a commitment from federal resources beyond what we saw in the budget? Is Alberta putting any money on the table here? Is there any money for any other partners, for private sector or Indigenous? No. No dollar values whatsoever. That is all to be sorted out. And finally, with sort of the changes that are envisioned, the suspension, if you will, of the clean electricity regulations, the changes on methane, the agreement on the oil and gas emissions cap and so on, this vision for this strengthened carbon pricing, industrial carbon pricing regime, is this bespoke Alberta? Seems to be yes. This is not a deal that gets another province, whether it's neighboring Saskatchewan or someone else, off the hook when it comes to clean electricity regulations. This is bespoke to the government of Alberta as pertains to this bigger kind of vision that they are laying out. And that brings to mind, finally, another political question I have, and I understand Doug Ford has already sort of made some noise about this at his event today. Will there be equal consideration, equal treatment for other premiers when it comes to some of the sort of, if you want to call it rolling back, adjusting, I'll use Mark Carney's word, of some of these environmental regulations when it comes to things of importance to their economies? This deal does not say that. Could they rightfully now go to the federal government and say, hey, you did this for Alberta, show me some love too? I would wonder if the politics of the situation are such that that could be something you could anticipate in this world of, hopefully we can get the same too. So I think that is sort of something to watch, but of course also to watch is how this plays out in the individual jurisdictions. And in particular, I think all eyes go to British Columbia, because there's a lot of language here about this now broadening to become a three-way conversation, with a three-way economic and financial conversation happening. And yet it wasn't negotiated with British Columbia at the table. And BC Premier David Eby has spoken out quite strongly about his strong feelings about that. But this very much now intended to become a three-chair table, if not a four-chair or five-chair table, as I was talking about. So does BC want to join them? Does BC want to have this conversation? And now that it has been made obvious that we are moving in the direction of a declaration of national interest for a bitumen pipeline, does BC have any other choice? And that's some tough politics for a lot of people. But nevertheless, that I think is the bet that Mark Carney is making, that will be how it will be seen.
Janice, thank you for all of those details. We appreciate that. Of course, that is the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. And of course, we're continuing to collect all of the reaction that is coming out to the details that we've learned on this memorandum of understanding, this energy agreement between the federal government and Alberta. We should also make note when we're talking about British Columbia, we are expecting to hear from the province's premier later on this afternoon. Of course, CBC News will have coverage of that once it gets underway. But for more on all of this, we also want to turn to the CBC's Aaron Collins. He's in Calgary, tracking political reaction out of Alberta. I understand the Premier's office has already sent out a release as well. So let's talk about some of that reaction that we're seeing and how you think this is going to play out for the Premier.
Well, look, Artie, fundamentally, this resets the political game board here in the province of Alberta. Just to put this in some kind of context, I mean, I was doing this job when Northern Gateway was approved, when the 209 conditions were put down on it. Also, there when the tanker ban was put in and essentially this project died. So one would think on the surface, this has got to be a really big win for Danielle Smith today, right? This is a project that proponents of it have wanted in this province, have said that the industry here needs for decades. So it should be a big win. There's lots for Premier Smith to crow about in this memorandum of understanding today. And I think that is how it will be received in general by conservative voters, by many Albertans who maybe even didn't vote for Danielle Smith in the last provincial election. But it could be a different story in a certain segment of her more conservative base, and that's because this is a group of people that are very, very distrustful of the federal government. They to the point where there is a significant segment of the far right of Danielle Smith's United Conservative Party that would like to see Alberta leave Confederation, would leave Canada. And it's going to be those folks that will, in large part, be populating the annual general meeting, the AGM for the United Conservative Party, that's going to be held this weekend. So I don't think that there is a coincidence in the fact that this drops today. It's going to be discussed intensely over the weekend by that segment of Danielle Smith's party. She'll be forced to defend it. So I think you can kind of look at how this is going to be received here in Alberta in those two ways. I think in general, this will be reviewed positively for a lot of the reasons that Janice outlined, but there will be a segment potentially of Danielle Smith's party that doesn't react quite as positively. So that's the internal Alberta side of the equation. There's also going to be a whole bunch of work for the Premier to do. As Janice mentioned there, there's going to need to be a reaching out to those coastal First Nations as well as to the government of British Columbia. Now, interestingly, the language there does seem to lead you to believe that it's not like British Columbia is going to be able to veto this project, and the consultations are sort of the name of the game here. But it is going to be a heavy lift to get those folks to at least come on board to a certain degree, and it's a struggle that previous premiers have had. Whether you're talking about NDP premiers or Conservative premiers, we heard earlier today from Danielle Smith's predecessor, Jason Kenney, about those challenges that await the current Premier of Alberta. Have a listen to that.
So I think as long as First Nations are offered equity participation and responsible projects, our experience, at least in Western Canada, is that they will get behind them. You have to do it right. You have to front-end load the Indigenous consultations. But as for BC, frankly, they can have their say on a proposal down the line, but they don't get to veto it.
And I think you see in this memorandum of understanding an echo of some of those sentiments. Several times in the document, Indigenous ownership of this project, participation benefits are mentioned, as well as participation and benefit from the province of British Columbia. But it doesn't sound like they're going to be able to spike this project if they don't like it.
And Aaron, of course, as we've sort of been touching on throughout the course of our program, but also even with my conversation with you, there are some political risks for the Prime Minister too. Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's risks, right? We've heard a lot about that. Will some members of the Liberal caucus not like this enough to walk away? Potentially, I suppose. Will there be members in Liberal MPs from British Columbia that are upset by this? I think it's fair to say there will be. Whether or not that manifests itself publicly and you have sort of public discontent and bickering within the Liberal caucus, that's difficult to say. But it's also important to note, like, there could be some benefits here, right? I mean, I do think this takes a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the criticism that you have been hearing from the federal Conservative Party. It's going to be a little hard for Pierre Poilievre to argue that, Mark Carney is against pipelines and picking on Alberta and not doing anything to support the energy industry with some of the details that are embedded inside of this MOU. So I think there is a benefit to Mark Carney and the Liberal Party on that front. But there's also it will be interesting to watch some of those close urban ridings here in Calgary, where I am, and in Edmonton as well, that were kind of close to swinging Liberal in the last federal election. But hey, they were maybe not totally convinced that this was a new iteration of that party that would be more supportive of the biggest industry in this province. Maybe that's changed. Maybe there will be an opportunity to pick up a couple seats more here in Alberta, which is, as I said, a total game changer as far as the political chessboard here in the province. That's a possibility, certainly not a certainty, but that's a possibility as well. So some risks for sure for the Prime Minister in this memorandum of understanding politically within his own party, but perhaps some benefits or potential benefits as well in the wedge that's driven between the federal Conservative Party and also the provincial Conservative parties, because you do have Pierre Poilievre, who's been railing against the industrial carbon tax nonstop, and now Danielle Smith saying she's okay with it, which isn't news, but also committing to a scheduled increase of that industrial carbon tax in the coming years. So fascinating day, resetting the politics here in Alberta and certainly tweaking it in Ottawa as well. It'll be wonderful to see what happens as this rolls out.
And there will be plenty of reaction. We know you'll be tracking it all for us as people continue to digest the details of this agreement. Thanks for this, Aaron. That is the CBC's Aaron Collins in Calgary. And with that, we want to stay in Calgary because we understand the Premier is speaking right now, and that is following the signing of that memorandum of understanding with the Prime Minister. Let's listen in to the remarks from Danielle Smith.
Before going on to some of his other meetings today, as well as a speech at the Chamber, I'm so delighted to be here with not only members of my cabinet, but also our partners in Indigenous communities. We've got Rebecca Schultz, Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rajan Sani, Minister of Indigenous Relations, Jason Nixon, Minister of Assisted Living and Social Services. He was part of our negotiating team. Nathan Neudorf, Minister of Affordability and Utilities. Minister Brian Jean, Green, Minister of Energy and Minerals. And then, of course, we have Billy Morin, former chief, but he's now MP for Edmonton Northwest. Former Chief Jim Boucher of the Mackay First Nation. Chris Sankey, former councillor of Laxqualam Band in British Columbia. Dave Lamouche, President of Métis Settlements General Council. Chief George Arcan Jr. of Alexander First Nation. Chief Tony Alexis of Alexander Nakota Sioux Nation. Chief Cody Thomas of Enoch Cree Nation. Chief Kelsey Jacko of Cold Lake First Nations. We also have a friend visiting from Saskatchewan, Chief Delbert Wapas of Thunderchild First Nation, and of course Stephen Buffalo, President and CEO of the Indian Resource Council. We had a few others on the list. I'm not sure that they are here, but I'm going to see more at the Indian Resource Council meeting a little bit later today, where I'm going to go for a lunch speech. But today is a great day for the people of Alberta and for all of Canada. The last 10 years have been an extremely difficult time for hundreds of thousands of Albertans and their families that directly or indirectly rely on and make their living from a strong and vibrant and growing Alberta oil and gas sector. These Albertans are mothers and fathers and young people working so hard to put food on the table, to pay for hockey and soccer fees, and to save for the down payment on their first home. These are also small business owners that too often have found themselves as well in their business working very hard to build due to a regulatory environment that has made it almost impossible for them to succeed. And more broadly, the last 10 years have left hundreds of thousands of Albertans skeptical and oftentimes questioning the long-term viability of our nation as we watched its deliberate phase-out of our province's most valuable asset, leaving it trapped and wasted in the vast oil sands of northern Alberta, and with it, innumerable lost investment opportunities and tens of thousands of lost jobs. These were dark times, but in those difficult circumstances, Albertans came together, as we always do, to raise our voices and use our ingenuity to find a way to overcome the challenge. We fought and won in the courts of law. We fought and won in the court of public opinion. And we fought because we had to, because that's what Albertans do. We always fight very hard for this province that we love so dearly and for its incredible people. But Albertans are also proud and loyal Canadians. We don't fight for the sake of fighting. We don't look for conflict when there's an opportunity for peace and prosperity. Albertans are happiest when we are hard at work getting things done, solving problems, creating opportunities, building our province and our country. That is when we are truly at our best. However, in order for Alberta to find its way to prosperity within a united Canada, we need the federal government to partner with us instead of fighting against us. Now, Prime Minister Mark Carney and I may not always agree on everything, but we do share a few key beliefs. We both know that Canada can never reach its true potential as a global energy superpower without a strong and thriving Alberta energy sector at the center of that effort. And I am pleased to say that this Prime Minister has made it clear to me that he is willing to work with me and Alberta's government to accomplish that shared goal. And that, my friends, is something that we have not seen from a Canadian Prime Minister in over a decade. And it is my firm belief that Albertans from right across the political spectrum, whether they be staunch federal conservatives or liberals or new Democrats or something else, they expect me as their premier to partner with this federal government to seize this long-awaited opportunity for our province. I've spoken at length about the need to build more pipeline infrastructure, to export more oil to hungry Asian markets, and to diversify our customer base. I have repeatedly stated how critical it is to reform a broken regulatory environment that is scaring away investment and demoralizing our energy entrepreneurs here at home. And I have asked repeatedly for the federal government to cease their attempts to throttle our energy industry, repeal or overhaul their 9 bad laws, and work with Alberta to grow our energy sector for the benefit of the entire country. And today's agreement is the first step in accomplishing all of these critical objectives and unleashing the power and promise of Alberta's energy sector in a way never seen before in this country. This agreement means the end of the punitive oil and gas emissions cap so that our great energy producers can grow and thrive again. This agreement means the immediate suspension of the federal net zero power regulations in Alberta, which had placed our electrical grid at a very serious risk of failure and limited any hope of substantial investment in AI data centers and applications development. This agreement includes a clear path to the construction of an over 1 million barrel per day Indigenous co-owned bitumen pipeline to Asian markets so that our province and our country are no longer dependent on just one customer to buy our most valuable resource. This agreement also allows for needed adjustments to the tanker ban when the new pipeline to Asia is approved by the Major Projects Office, as well as amendments that will ensure our companies are able to advertise their environmental leadership and efforts throughout the world without a fear of penalty. And this agreement also means that Alberta will be a world leader in the development and implementation of emissions reduction infrastructure, particularly in carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Alberta has a unique opportunity to show the entire world that the solution for reducing emissions does not entail capping productivity, growth, or innovation in oil and gas development. Rather, it is to leverage the profitability of the oil and gas sector to invest in the very technologies that will revolutionize all industries in their effort to reduce emissions globally. This agreement means Alberta will work with our federal partners and the Pathways companies to commence and complete the world's largest carbon capture, utilization, and storage infrastructure project. It will also make Alberta heavy oil the lowest intensity barrel on the market and displace millions of barrels of heavier emitting fuels around the globe. This is Alberta's moment of opportunity. Our opportunity to show the nation, as well as the entire world, that resource development and emissions reduction can not only coexist, but can actually complement one another for the benefit of billions of people around the world. Alberta is willing to take on and conquer the challenge as partners with the federal government. Now, I need to be clear, the government is just, this agreement with the government is just the first step in this journey. There is much more hard work to be done. Trust must be built and earned in the partnership as we move through the next steps of this process, whether that be working with the federal government to prepare our bitumen pipeline submission for the Major Projects Office, or putting together the final elements of a carbon pricing agreement that will be implemented through the province's tier program that balances competitiveness with accountability for heavy emitters. And although I am not blind to the fact that the people of Alberta have had the rug pulled out from underneath them too many times to count over the past 10 years, I also know that a new relationship and a new beginning needs a starting point grounded in good faith. And today, I hope, is that new starting point. So I do want to thank the Prime Minister. So I do want to thank the Prime Minister as well as his team for working with my team to get this agreement to the finish line. I'd also like to thank our negotiating team, and that included Ministers Jason Nixon and Rajan Sawhney, along with my Chief of Staff, Rob Anderson, and Deputy Ministers Liam Stone and Larry Comeyer for the great work that they did on this initiative. And I'm excited, as is my government and our UCP MLAs, to roll up our sleeves and to continue the work on this remarkable opportunity for Alberta and for Canada. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you. Thanks so much. Now, I think Sam Blackett is somewhere moderating questions. Oh, there he is.
Yes, we'll now start the media Q&A. We are tight in time today. We'll be taking one question, one follow-up per usual. Please state your name and outlet before asking your question, and we'll start off at our mic in the room. Go ahead.
All right, Heather Yurix-West from Global National. Thanks for taking my question.
Yeah.
What is your view, Premier, of the power of BC or a First Nation to veto a potential pipeline deal? The MOU talks a lot about consultation, but what happens if an agreement can't be reached?
Well, as you can see, the MOU does not contain a veto.
But I think that we both recognize jointly that there is a requirement for consultation, and indeed we believe that there's an imperative for Indigenous ownership. We created the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, and it expanded its ability to underwrite up to $3 billion worth of loan guarantees. I see British Columbia also has a similar program. The federal government has a similar program. And so Minister Carney has already begun the engagement. She's been to Kitimat, she's been to Prince Rupert, she's been talking with the BC and Alberta nations. And we know that that's hard work that needs to be done, that we will do, we intend to do, and we're looking forward to having genuine consultation and ownership. And as for Premier Eby, I spoke with him last night. And there's lots in the agreement that we can focus on together, where he is supportive of the expansion of the Trans Mountain pipeline capacity. He is supportive of Intraties and working with us on nuclear. He's supportive of working with us on expanding additional LNG export as well as ammonia. So may not be in agreement with everything that is in this proposal, but we're going to have trilateral talks to make sure that we can move forward on the elements in this plan.
And my follow-up, do you think this MOU will be enough to distinguish, quell any remaining separatist sentiment that may remain in Alberta?
I hope so. I mean, I had always felt that the former government of Justin Trudeau created the independence movement, and my first conversations with Prime Minister Mark Carney were that he could end it. He could take the wind out of it. Because we saw this once before. We saw that independence sentiment was very high in the early 1980s when there was the National Energy Program. But when Brian Mulroney came in and reversed that policy, it disappeared. So I would say that good policy and genuinely addressing the concerns of Albertans is always a pathway to have a good and solid relationship. And I think the Prime Minister understands that. Certainly, based on this agreement, it shows he does, and so I'm hopeful.
Thanks.
Hi, Premier Ezra Levant from Rebel News. The first deadline in the MOU, if I'm reading it right, is April, where the duty is on Alberta to jack up carbon taxes. And the last date in the MOU, if I'm reading it right, correct me if I'm not, is 2040. That's when this pipeline, that's sort of the end date. It can't be any later than that. In terms of building trust with the anti-oil liberals, they're asking Alberta to raise carbon taxes now for a promise of an oil pipeline years or even more than a decade in the future. Does that really build trust?
Well, you have to start somewhere, and one thing I would say is that we did have the Supreme Court of Canada rule on the federal government's ability to set a price on emissions. So the Supreme Court has ruled on that. It's part of the reason why we negotiated a stringency agreement that would have seen the carbon tax price go up to $170 a barrel by 2030. We've demonstrated, and I think the Prime Minister agrees, that's too high, too fast. So that's why we understand that there was always going to be a negotiation around that. We froze the carbon tax at $95, pending consultation with the industry and greater work with the Prime Minister. But remember, Alberta was the first to have an industrial carbon price. They did we implemented that in 2007. It's generated revenues that have allowed us to invest billions of dollars in new technologies, including carbon capture. So there is a commitment on the part of the industry to have a carbon price, and we did do some consultation on that. We're just glad that we have the means to manage it our way in Alberta under our tier program, and you'll see as of April 1st, and no, that wasn't a joke, April 1st is going to be the date that we have an agreement on that front. When it comes to the building of a bitumen pipeline to Asian markets to the BC coast. Though, if you read the MOU, those two things have to happen in tandem. That we have to see the Pathways project proceeding at the same time as an agreement to build that. One is dependent on the other. I don't know that the Prime Minister would have agreed to a new bitumen pipeline without Pathways, and we wouldn't have agreed to Pathways without a new bitumen pipeline. So they are going to be staged. They are going to go on together. We've already had a meeting with Pathways about how we're going to do that. That will require a trilateral negotiation as well. But I'm very hopeful. Since we have used carbon capture technology before for enhanced oil recovery, that's another part of this announcement, is that CO2 will be able to be used for enhanced oil recovery, which should allow us to generate more revenue. So I would say that you don't always get 100% of what you want, but we addressed 7 out of the 9 bad laws that I'd put on the table to, I think, what will be the satisfaction of Albertans. And I think that this will allow us to see some substantial investments.
I mean, that's the thing about a peace deal. You have to make it with an enemy. So I suppose the fact that for a decade, his Glasgow financial alliance for net zero, it was about putting a capital strike on the oil and gas sector. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was asked about pipelines, and he said, boring. So is there anything, I mean, after a lifetime of attacking the oil patch, he was even interrogated by the U.S. Congress for an attempt to capital strike their oil companies. Is there anything the Prime Minister has said to you in private that you could share with us that would signal that his lifetime's work of attacking carbon-based fuels will somehow be put to the side? Like, I think he's just a slightly smarter version of Stephen Guilbeault. I think he hates the oil patch as his life's work. Is there anything he's said to you that make you believe that maybe he can be turned on this?
Well, I'll start by saying my joke has been that I would love for pipelines to be boring again. I would love for, no matter what party is in power, what level of government, that there wasn't sort of an overwrought response anytime anyone talked about building a pipeline. It's actually quite remarkable that we're talking about expanding uranium mines, building nuclear power plants, building new transmission lines through pristine areas, massive new mining projects, and not one of them has raised any ire on the part of any environmental group or anyone in the media, but there has been all of this ire raised around a pipeline. So I hope that we can make pipelines boring again, because it's just a way to get our product to the consumers who need it. I would say that, as you know, I was not a huge champion of carbon capture technology when I was in politics the first time. I wasn't. But I've seen with the passage of time, the investments being made and the fact that the technology works and we're getting better and better at it, and you can create a product out of it, including so that you can enhance oil recovery, I changed my mind. And so I would say that the Prime Minister, maybe in the past 10 years, it looked like wind and solar and batteries were going to be the ability to power industrial economies. I think the world discovered that's not true. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with the instability in the Middle East, everyone is having to recalibrate and rethink that. I was recently in the Middle East, and the conversation around the table now is talking about natural gas as a foundational fuel, not a transition fuel. So I think that demonstrates that there is a global understanding of how important it is to have reliable electricity. And so I have to just give the Prime Minister credit for perhaps he's recalibrating his own thinking on this. It certainly seems to be in the agreement that we signed, but we will trust, but we will verify. We will make sure that he lives up to the commitments in this agreement that we had, and we have to proceed somewhere with a measure of good faith. I can tell you 100% that the former Prime Minister would never have moved this far on these issues. We tried for 3 years, we got nowhere, and in my very first meeting with the Prime Minister, I said to him, you know, the way that we can get to an agreement is just orienting around a 2050 target. Our industry is there. We think it's achievable with technology. And you'll see in the context of this MOU that the interim targets are gone. And so that's what we're going to move forward on. And we'll see as we meet these milestones whether I'm correct or whether your skepticism is correct.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ezra. We're going to take one more from the room, then take 1 or 2 from the phones before coming back to the room. Go ahead.
Hi, Premier. Laura Osmond with The Logic. When it comes to trying to find a proponent for this pipeline, is this MOU enough to start bringing private investment on board? Or in your conversations with potential proponents, are they looking to get farther down the line? At what point do you think you might be able to announce some kind of proponent taking over?
Well, I think that the fact that this room filled up with, 24 hours notice gives you an idea of the enthusiasm that we have in the sectors that make billion-dollar investment decisions. And many of the people in this room have been holding on to capital or redeploying it elsewhere. So I think that's going to cause a lot of really interesting conversations now that they've seen the structure of this agreement. We'll know in the coming weeks and months, generally speaking, about final investment decisions. But I've been encouraged to see that even with the announcement in the budget that they were looking at not implementing the emissions cap, which we confirm today, you've seen Enbridge talk about 400,000 barrels a day on their main line that they want to expand. TMX has talked about an additional 400,000 barrels per day that they want to optimize. South Bow, using the old Keystone assets, have talked about a 650,000 barrel a day project. I've been in touch, the folks from the St. Lawrence Seaway Group have been in touch with me saying, can we get oil to Thunder Bay so that we can get it out on tankers to markets in Europe. We have oil by rail projects being talked about going all the way to Nova Scotia and being exported out of Sydney. I'm watching with great interest as Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew negotiates an economic corridor co-owned with First Nations, and whether there's an opportunity for us to also be able to have a pipeline go there and also reach European markets. Doug Ford and I signed an MOU about perhaps having a spur line going to James Bay with a similar kind of model. So all of those projects are now going to be able to go ahead because there is not going to be an emissions cap on our production. And in the meantime, because I think our biggest opportunity is a new market, a new pipeline to get to markets in Asia, I'll be spending a lot of time working on that. So we have, I think, 20 individuals at our table giving us advice from all of the big pipeline companies who have over 100 years, I think, of expertise, more than that, I think, combined in doing these kinds of big projects. And in the end, you'll see the MOU says that we want a private proponent to build that. I don't think it would be success if we have to have the federal government once again have to pay for an overpriced, expensive pipeline. I think we want to create the conditions so that the private sector has confidence and will build it. So that's what we're working towards. We knew we needed to get through these first few phases, but I'm pretty confident with the people we have at the table that one or a consortium of them, once we establish that it is on the major projects list, will be willing to take this on.
You have mentioned that it's a long road. You still have to build trust. You've had the rug pulled out from you before. Pipeline aside, is the changes to the emissions cap and the clean energy regulations enough, do you think, to increase oil production in Alberta and improve the investment environment here?
Well, I think almost certainly. The problem with the emissions cap is that, especially with the interim targets of 2030 and 2035, the only way to achieve that, because we wouldn't have been able to build the carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or the fuel variety like nuclear, or have advanced direct air capture. The only way to achieve them would be to shut in production. And it wasn't just us saying that. There's several different reports that went out saying as much as 2 million barrels a day would have to be shut in by 2035. So we now have a longer time horizon to address the issues of emissions. We've a big change is that we're going to have a look at heavy oil on the basis of emissions intensity compared to other heavy barrels around the world. That is also, I think, going to be a major confidence booster. And then on the other side, when I was recently in the Middle East, I talked to a company, Taka, that had talked about wanting to do an AI data center. They were going to build their own natural gas power, but they told me because of the clean electricity regs, which meant they'd have to turn it off in 2035, they didn't even get started. And I have to wonder how many other projects of that nature didn't even get started because of the clean electricity regs. So now that there's an immediate suspension of that, there will, of course, be pending our agreement on what the tier pricing will be. But there has always been a carbon price on heavy emitters, and that included in the electricity sector. So I think we'll be able to give that injection of confidence. I guess we'll know in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. We're going to go to the phones for one and then come back to the room for our last one. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Your first caller comes from the line of Ryan Humilty from Toronto Star. Your line is now open.
Yeah, good afternoon, Premier. Thanks for taking the question. The MOU sets out obligations on both Alberta and the government. If the government of Canada lives up to its obligations, but a private proponent doesn't emerge for the bitumen pipeline, is Alberta still committed to increasing its carbon price and the other commitments that you've made on pathways and other projects?
Well, as I said, we have always had a carbon price. We were the first to put one in place in 2007. We have just recently made changes to TIER to allow those revenues to be recycled back to companies so that they can invest in carbon capture technology. We have put in place our ACIP program, which is our carbon capture incentive program, where we rebate 12% of the cost of any investment in carbon capture. We've got a major center in central Alberta where 10 different direct air capture projects are underway. We have signed agreements not only with the federal government, but with our fellow premiers on looking at how we would add nuclear to the grid. So all of those things are underway. All of those things will continue to go. And what we're very hopeful is that as we stage gate the development of a bitumen pipeline, we'll also do the same thing with the Pathways project. And then we'll be able to have the largest carbon capture project in the world, which I think will also be another major export opportunity for us. So I would say that we showed our commitment when we released our energy development and emissions reduction plan in April of 2023. And most of the elements that we announced then, you'll see are enshrined in this agreement that we have today.
And then the coastal First Nations, especially, but certainly BC as well, have said so far publicly, they said they really don't support this pipeline. It seems like the MOU puts bringing those people on side in your court. Can you expand upon how you intend to do that and how you intend to see that happens?
Well, I can tell you that there are some leadership in some nations that have been vocal, absolutely. But as you can see, there are some leaders of some nations that are in this room supportive as well. And that's the nuance that happens. That will be, no matter whether it's a nation or whether it's a province or whether it's a political party, there's just different opinions on things. But what this agreement shows is that we're going to work collaboratively to work towards a bitumen pipeline to Asian markets on the West Coast. And when we arrive at a port, that will also have a tanker ban carve-out for that. So I would say that my Indigenous Relations Minister is doing tremendous work on doing the initial engagement, which will ultimately lead to a more formal consultation process. We're beginning with a spirit of goodwill, having had some success with our AIOC. I think that demonstrates credibility in having a meaningful equity ownership stake. And we've had very constructive meetings. I had a very constructive meeting, you may have read, with the Haisla chief and council and others yesterday, where they may not be 100% behind a bitumen pipeline, but they're excited about LNG export. They wanted us to make sure that we knew that Kitimat is a thriving port for all kinds of commodities. And so I think that that's where the relationship begins. Let's talk about areas of agreement, and then let's work through the areas of disagreement. But I think that we will find over time that there are many nations who are also interested in these kinds of projects so they can bring prosperity to their people. And that's our starting point on this.
Thank you. And if you're really quick, Premier, we might be able to squeeze in two more. Okay. We'll go to our next to the mic.
Sheila Gunn Reid with Rebel News. Just staying on the topic of British Columbia, the Prime Minister has said in the House of Commons just 2 days ago, we believe the government of British Columbia has to agree. Now, just now, after he left the signing with you, his press release says these projects will only be built in consultation and partnership with Indigenous rights holders and British Columbia. So what is the real strength of this MOU when you have a partner who keeps giving veto to British Columbia?
Well, you'll see in the agreement there's no mention of veto. I think that there obviously has to be trilateral discussions with British Columbia to find areas of common ground, and I think we will. And there's also
Canadian Building Trades Union. I want to thank Jay and Colin.
We do want to take you now to the scene where we know Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, is speaking following signing that memorandum of understanding with the Premier. He's speaking in Calgary. Let's listen into some of his remarks.
Big day and a start of much more. On va commencer. Quelques questions.
We'll begin with a few questions.
We'll be ready to take questions.
Yep.
First question.
Pas de questions, no questions.
No
okay?
questions?
No, just kidding.
Yes, please. The mic is over here.
There's the mic over there.
First question, première question.
Anissa Dari, CBC. Prime Minister, are you willing to approve a pipeline even if British Columbia or affected First Nations don't agree? Would you compensate them instead?
Just to be clear, this agreement today between Alberta and the Government of Canada, it's the first step. It's an example of cooperative federalism. We're agreeing in partnership and in a spirit of trust. But what has to happen, several things have to happen before a pipeline is built. And one of those is a private sector proponent. Secondly, it goes directly to your question, which is that there needs to be full partnership, including equity ownership, substantial economic benefits with First Nations in Alberta, First Nations in British Columbia, as well as agreement and substantial economic benefits for the people of British Columbia. So we look at this as the start of a process. We've created some of the necessary conditions for this to happen. But there's a lot more work to do, and very much in the spirit of partnership. Et en français, c'est un grand moment pour l'Alberta et pour le Canada, mais c'est le commencement d'un processus.
And Canada, but it's the beginning of a process. And there are a lot of different steps involved. We are beginning with the need to find a private sector proponent for the new pipeline. And this is also absolutely fundamental. There must be a partnership with the Indigenous peoples in Alberta and British Columbia. It has to be a partnership with substantial benefits, and that includes an equity ownership in the project, as well as substantial benefits for the people of British Columbia. So as I said, this is only the beginning of the process. It's a process of engagement, of discussion, and partnership.
What if there aren't any private sector proponents? You mentioned them there.
Well, if there's not a private sector proponent, there won't be a pipeline. I mean, and let me say another thing, if I could, just to take advantage of your question, which this agreement is about much more than just a pipeline. Pipeline's obviously an important component to this, and specifically as a priority of Pipeline to Asia. But it's also the Pathways Project, the world's largest carbon capture storage project, a project that will make Alberta energy, specifically oil and gas, competitive for the long term because it'll make it low carbon. A project that will create an entirely new industry, an industry that needs workers, like the workers here. It's also about nuclear, building nuclear capacity in Alberta, building interties, transmission interties. We need a lot of iron for transmission interties with British Columbia, with Saskatchewan. So we have a much more efficient and competitive and lower cost grid. And it's about building AI data centers that are sovereign, to use the word. So that means that we control in Canada our data, our information, our intelligence, if I can put it that way. So it's a very ambitious and comprehensive partnership, and there's many things that can be done going forward.
Et aussi en français.
En français, c'est alors, s'il n'y a pas un acteur dans le secteur privé pour le pipeline,
if there is not a private sector proponent for the pipeline, there will not be a pipeline. That's clear. It's not about federal government money or funding from Alberta. But this memorandum of understanding involves much more than just a pipeline. It refers to the Pathways project for carbon capture and storage, and that will be the world's largest carbon capture and storage project in the world, which is great for Alberta and for Canada. It also involves nuclear energy and connections between hydroelectric systems between Alberta and BC and Saskatchewan, and perhaps the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. And it also includes data centers, AI data centers. So there's a lot to be done. And we will need a lot of skilled workers to make this happen, like the ones who are with us today.
Radio-Canada, on va poursuivre en français. Comment pensez-vous être en mesure de garder Stephen Guilbeault au sein de
Do you
votre
think
cabinet
you can keep Stephen Guilbeault in your team, given this decision? Well, this agreement is only the beginning of a process, as I said. For example, when it comes to government elements, we will have to determine what the process will be for the Pathways project involving clean energy. And basically, this agreement involves strengthening the tier system, in other words, the carbon industrial price. And there is a commitment from Alberta to remove the effective price from the tier system to bring it down to $130. This is 6 times more than the current price. There are other examples, but strengthening the rules when it comes to gas emissions reduction is also involved. So it's a process which will extend till the month of April. Is that enough to prevent Stephen Guilbeault from leaving cabinet? Well, it's enough for the government of Canada. I'm the Prime Minister, and my role is to make decisions in the interests of Alberta and Canada. And what we're seeking here are results, real emissions reductions, and that requires investment. Investment in Alberta and investment in British Columbia, investment on a large scale right across Canada. And with this agreement, we are creating the conditions for major investments in carbon capture and storage and our hydroelectric systems and nuclear energy. And all of that is necessary. And the investments in methane emissions reduction as well. All of this is necessary to lower emissions.
Just to summarize the 2 answers. What is in this agreement are the components, the 2 things. One is an agreement that then is finalized and made more specific over the course of the next several months by the start of April. But at its core is tightening the tier system, which is the industrial carbon price system here in Alberta, to a level of at least $130 with a past price from there. What does that mean? It means more than a 6 times increase in the industrial price of carbon, from its effective level, which is much lower than the headline level, the effective level, to the level that's committed in the agreement. That's the first thing. The second is methane reductions in methane, more than 75% reductions in methane by 2035, that commitment that's there. Thirdly, it creates the conditions for this big investment in the Pathways project, the largest in the world, which will have huge reductions in emissions, the equivalent of taking more than 90% of the cars and trucks off the roads here in Alberta in the first phase of that project. It also creates the conditions for nuclear power and the conditions for interties between British Columbia, which is a clean grid, with Saskatchewan, with the Northwest Territories and Yukon, all to make it more efficient, more sustainable. We are going to get to our greenhouse gas objectives, our climate objectives, only through massive investment. And so we need agreements like this in order to drive that massive investment. That's one of the reasons why this is a good day for Alberta, a good day for Canada, and that's what the government of Canada is committed to doing. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you.
You've been listening to Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking live in Calgary following a meeting with the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, signing a memorandum of understanding on oil pipeline or on oil pipelines, and saying that this is a good day for Canada. This is a good day for Alberta. The federal government committing to helping Alberta build a pipeline through a private proponent with certain conditions, but also with certain environmental obligations. For more analysis, let's bring in CBC News Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton and Power maybe not David Cochran. Oh, is he there? Is David Cochran there too?
He
slipped away. Okay, so Rosie,
he has a show to do.
Okay, so Rosie, it's all right. I know. This is pretty big, right? I mean, you know, I think the last year we have seen some extraordinary moments in Canadian political history. I think, and this might make the top 10, top 5 list. The official signing has taken place. The agreement has been lauded as a critical step towards achieving the shared goal of turning Canada into an energy superpower and building a stronger economy. What more can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge day, both from a policy perspective, what has been put on the table here, and also from a political perspective, and a day where we ultimately still have a lot of questions, I think, about how this will unfold. Let's start with the mechanics that have been announced today. Yes, this is about a new pipeline that would run from Alberta to the West Coast into British Columbia and creating that pipeline under the Major Projects Office. It will be designated a project of national interest. That is important because it will allow the government to greenlight the project no matter what. However, there are a whole bunch of conditions that have been laid out in the agreement that have to start happening as sort of the process gets underway, the first steps of this get underway. One of them, as you just heard the Prime Minister talking about, is the Pathways Alliance, which for people at home is a project that has long been talked about by many energy companies. It's a carbon and capture storage project, which, as you heard from the Prime Minister, would make a significant impact on reducing emissions coming from the oil sands in Alberta. So the pipeline and the Pathways Alliance project have to both sort of be happening at the same time, in tandem. And indeed, if the pipeline doesn't go forward, the Pathways Alliance project also doesn't go forward. That is clearly said in the deal. Alberta has also, in exchange, agreed to accept the industrial carbon pricing plan, bringing that price up to $130 a ton. They will have that agreement in place very quickly. A lot of these timelines are very, very tight, Andrew, which is also kind of a remarkable moment. In exchange, Alberta's clean energy regulations will be immediately suspended. They will not have to follow those regulations set down by the federal government. And as Ottawa had previously suggested in the budget, the cap on emissions will not go forward. So there are commitments here that Alberta has to make in order to advance the Prime Minister's agenda from a climate fighting perspective. But the ultimate reward, of course, is they get the conditions around a pipeline. So they get also potentially a tanker ban or a change to the Tanker Ban Act that was put in place if that is needed. What Alberta has to do here, though, to get to that point is pretty significant as well. I mean, this was the first big hurdle. You heard the Premier of Alberta say off the top of her comments that 7 of the 9, what she called bad laws, have been dealt with in this agreement, making the conditions for a pipeline much easier. So first, she will have to find a proponent. It is also clear in this deal that it has to be a private proponent. A company or a group of companies have to come up with the cash to make this happen. The much harder part of what Alberta and indeed the federal government to some extent have to do is get British Columbia to accept this idea and get First Nations buy-in through communities that will be affected. That will also come with an economic component. There'll be a financial sort of advantage for those communities and the province if they go ahead with it. But it is very unclear at this time, to me anyway, how they get particularly the BC Premier's agreement. But again, they don't have to get it. You know, I think the Prime Minister was talking a lot about cooperative federalism. That's one way to look at it, but it is not clear at this stage whether everyone's going to cooperate.
Yeah, these are such important and good questions.
Yeah.
This is a project deemed of national interest, so that is significant. And when you talk about British Columbia, and we are going to hear from David Eby at a news conference later this afternoon, we know that he's not on board with this. His argument has been in the past, Rosie, or certainly in recent weeks, it's just like, there is a Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project that is pushing oil through it. It could push significantly more oil through it, so why don't you do that first? But my understanding of this memorandum of understanding is that this is about another pipeline it's in addition to the potential of expanding that Trans Mountain pipeline. Is that your understanding? And if that's the case, then I don't know. We'll have to see what he has to say.
Yeah, I mean, his sort of what he was putting on the table as this conversation was ramping up last week was, well, why don't you bring the current Trans Mountain to full capacity, which it is not currently operating. I think it's at about 82 or 83% of capacity. There's all sorts of ways to get oil through the pipeline faster and potentially more efficiently. That's sort of what he was hoping would be on the table. That is not. I mean, that will likely happen, right, because of the company itself. But what is on the table is one or more pipelines to the West Coast through British Columbia with a private proponent. So that, you know, on the face of it, I don't know that will be acceptable to the Premier of British Columbia. But the MOU, the deal, says multiple times that they have to start a trilateral engagement. They have to start talking to British Columbia. You heard Premier Smith say that she spoke to Premier Eby last night, that there were things here that he was willing to work together on, and other things, for instance, the pipeline where he did not have agreement. There is the promise not only of a conversation, but again, as I said, some economic benefits from a new pipeline. There's also mention in the deal of approving more projects of national interest for British Columbia. Currently, that province has 4 that are sort of in the offing, but even more could be considered, perhaps by Ottawa, if they agree to this. But again, you know, particularly when it comes to the issue of the tanker ban, for people in British Columbia, that is a really fundamental thing for people who live on the West Coast. Not because there aren't oil tankers, there are, but they are limited in terms of size and capacity in order to try and reduce the risk of oil spills. So to have that
and in the coastal waters, right? Sort of in the Northwest. Like this is what we're not talking about in the Lower Mainland, where we know there are tankers, right, that go in and collect that oil and bring it to Asia. But you're talking specifically about a potential new pipeline that would go much further north.
Yeah, and that is of really big importance to people in British Columbia and First Nations there. So the fact that that is now on the table, if it is needed, I think would be upsetting and disconcerting to people in that province. But again, what the point that you made, that this is a project of national interest, the project itself will have to be fully outlined and sent to the Major Projects Office by July 1st of next year. Again, these timelines are fairly extraordinary. And at that point, the project will be a project of national interest, and that is under Bill C-5, which means that the federal government can exempt whatever regulations or laws are needed in order to get the pipeline built. And of course, from a jurisdictional perspective and a constitutional perspective, the federal government does have the right to build another pipeline and authorize another pipeline. It also, however, constitutionally, is required to consult with Indigenous peoples about that pipeline. So that also is an enormous hurdle, given some of those coastal First Nations who are totally opposed to the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be speaking with some of those coastal First Nations, as well as other people that are interested in this, who are in favor of it, who are opposed to it. I want to ask you a little bit about the environmental. You talked a little bit about it. It was interesting to hear Mark Carney say, because interestingly, people remember Mark Carney, his first major act as Prime Minister was to get rid of the consumer carbon tax, the price on pollution. That is gone. He says with this deal that Alberta is agreeing to a 6 times increase to the industrial price of carbon, as well as methane reduction down by 75% by 2035 and some others. But I mean, for the Prime Minister, he's touting that, I think, as saying, look, I'm not abandoning the environment or the environmental caucus of the Liberal Party, 20 Liberal MPs, other Liberal MPs and cabinet ministers like Stephen Guilbeault, the former Environment Minister. There is a commitment here to reduce emissions.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way he has to explain it, frankly, from a political perspective, and it'll be up to people to believe to consider whether the trade-off makes sense. But his suggestion, it seems to be, whether it be the industrial carbon price, which, fair enough, is going to be substantially increased at a rate much faster than previously considered, the Pathways Alliance, the carbon capture and storage, the methane regulations, that all of those things combined will make Alberta's oil, according to him and to the Premier, sort of the cleanest and most energy efficient oil on the planet, which will then make it more attractive to lots of nations that have those similar concerns and values that we have, South Korea, Japan, and others. The problem is that he's putting those things on the table at the same time as he's basically saying yes to a pipeline, and let's see how we can get there. And that will be enormously disappointing for some people within the Liberal caucus, who saw this party as a progressive party that fights climate change and thought Mr. Carney was very committed to that. He, I think, is trying to make the case today that is still true, that those values remain, but that given the context we are in, particularly in regards to the United States, that this is something that is needed at this moment, and that the other trade-offs make sense from an environmental perspective. There is an enormous, I think, political risk to what the Prime Minister is doing here in terms of his seats in British Columbia, his seats in Quebec, and potentially elsewhere. But there is some benefit. This puts a awfully big squeeze on the Conservative Party, who just yesterday, Andrew, was saying, okay, they're going to sign a deal, but what about a pipeline? Well, that line isn't going to work anymore. And it will be interesting to see how Mr. Poilievre responds, and what that means also for sort of purple conservatives who kind of like some of the things Mr. Carney is putting forward, and including this might be quite amenable to this idea as well. So it's a bit of a tightrope here for the Prime Minister, certainly politically, but he's rolled the dice. He's decided that it is important to have some sort of agreement with Alberta and try and use the economic potential and growth that is available through the oil sands to find economic benefit for Canada. There's a long way to go, of course, before we get there, but this is a big move by the Prime Minister for sure.
Yeah, sure is. It is a fascinating day for this country, I think. We'll see how it all plays out, but yeah. Rosie, thank you. CBC News Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton. For more on this, let's turn to the CBC's Aaron Collins in Calgary. So, Aaron, how do you think this will play out for Danielle Smith?
Yeah, Andrew, a big day, you're right, here for Canada, but also just a massive day politically, economically here in Alberta, and especially for Danielle Smith, right? So it really resets the political chessboard in the province, or at least has the potential to. This pipeline, if it ever does emerge by 2029, has taken a long and winding path. I remember covering its approval at the NEB board downtown here in about 2014. I remember the tanker ban being implemented in 2015 that killed it, and now here it is back in play again. And it's hard to imagine how getting that back across the finish line, getting it back in the national conversation, isn't a win for Danielle Smith. And I think it is for most of the people who voted for the United Conservative Party, and I think for a substantial number of people who might have voted for the New Democrats in the last provincial election as well. Pipelines are popular here. The oil and gas industry is integral to the economy in this province, and getting another line built is commonly held as an important piece of the equation for the future of the economy of Alberta. So I think that in that segment of the population, the vast majority of Albertans, this is a win, and Danielle Smith is going to, be in pretty good light here on that level. I got a text from my aunt in Stettler, Alberta, saying, "Wow," earlier today, and that's not something you would normally hear. But I do think it's important to talk about the timing of this. This is happening the day before the annual general meeting for Danielle Smith's United Conservative Party, and that's going to be held over the weekend. And it's important to note, Andrew, that the base of that party is not the same as the general electorate here in Alberta. They're much more conservative. They're much more skeptical of anything that Ottawa does. These are folks that would like to have an Alberta police force, an Alberta pension plan. They are, in many cases, separatists inside this segment of the base. And that's who Danielle Smith is going to have to convince that this is a good deal for Alberta, and that could be a tougher sell. And that's the sell you can hear her starting to make today, even in her first comments about this. Have a listen.
It is my firm belief that Albertans from right across the political spectrum, whether they be staunch federal conservatives or liberals or new Democrats or something else, they expect me as their premier to partner with this federal government to seize this long-awaited opportunity for our province. I've spoken at length about the need to build more pipeline infrastructure, to export more oil to hungry Asian markets, and to diversify our customer base.
So, you know, obviously highlighting some of the benefits of this MOU, but recognizing that Danielle Smith, recognizing that she is going to have maybe a heavy lift selling this to her base over the weekend.
Yeah, so she has a big sell job over the weekend, and arguably Mark Carney with certain segments of his caucus, different parts of the country, will have maybe not much of Alberta. He won't have a sell job, but he doesn't have any seats in Alberta, right? Or he has one?
He has a couple. He has a couple.
Yep, sorry. But, you know, this is going to be a hard sell job for him.
100%. And it's interesting because both of these politicians, skilled politicians, are going to have to make the pitch to a certain segment of their base that this is a good deal. And for Mark Carney, that's the environmental side of his caucus. You heard Rosie talking about it when she was speaking with you. And you can hear him already answering questions about what it's going to mean for someone like Stephen Guilbeault and his future with the party. Have a listen to that.
But at its core is tightening the tier system, which is the industrial carbon price system here in Alberta, to a level of at least $130 with a pass price from there. What does that mean? It means more than a 6 times increase in the industrial price of carbon, from its effective level, which is much lower than the headline level, the effective level, to the level that's committed in the agreement.
So Mark Carney, a skilled politician in his own right, pitching this pipeline MOU as good for the environment. It'll be fascinating to see how these two politicians sell this deal.
Agreed. Aaron, thank you. The CBC's Aaron Collins, live in Calgary. Now, Alberta may be celebrating, but British Columbia, not so much. Opposition there is likely to be fierce. The CBC's Tanya Fletcher is on this angle of the story. She joins us live now from Vancouver. So, Tanya, there's been a lot of pushback in BC. How are people feeling about this process?
Well, no doubt, Andrew, BC is kind of the elephant in the room, or some might say the elephant in the way of getting this proposed bitumen to the BC coast. There has been staunch opposition on political levels, on environmental levels from First Nations. So getting past those roadblocks is going to be challenging. And the key, as we heard from the Prime Minister and the Premier, Danielle Smith, to getting this project really off the ground. We've heard from First Nations all along, coastal First Nations, that their primary concern is if Ottawa does in fact give an exemption to the oil tanker ban along BC's north coast, the dangers of a potential oil spill, they say, would be catastrophic. Now, we've been up in Prince Rupert on the ground talking with people, and just yesterday we spoke with a member of the Haida Nation. He also considers himself an environmental activist, and he is staunchly opposed to any pipeline for fears of an oil spill.
I am absolutely disgusted when I heard that there was an MOU being discussed. And for the life of me, I can't figure out where they ever got permission from the First Nations that are going to be affected to negotiate that. I don't ever recall Danielle Smith getting permission from any of the nations to be able to sit down and put our livelihood in jeopardy.
So he went on to point behind him there, showing that that's our food supply, pointing to the ocean, the waters there. And beyond the environmental impact, we have heard from academics even who say that the economic case is still questionable. Here's an SFU professor we spoke with, professor of resources and environment, and he says the economic case may not just be there for Alberta.
There's approximately 1 million barrels of pipeline capacity expansion on those two pipelines. And as I say, the most optimistic forecast for Alberta is about an increase of 500,000 barrels in production. So expanding these pipelines will meet all of Alberta's need without building a new greenfields pipeline. So that's why the business case is not there for the pipeline.
And Andrew, as you and Rosie were talking, you mentioned that BC, when word of this MOU first came out, I think last week, BC's position initially was, hey, let's just pump the existing Trans Mountain pipeline, that expansion we built, to capacity, and perhaps the province was thinking that could be a concession of some sort that would maybe be satisfactory for Ottawa and Alberta. Clearly, as we've heard today now, that's not the case. So we'll have to see where BC goes from here and whether it's willing to budge.
Yeah, absolutely. As you point out, Tanya, this memorandum of understanding says that this would include any possible further expansion of oil through that Trans Mountain pipeline and include a new pipeline or pipelines to other parts of British Columbia, presumably further north. Politically, it's just been very fraught. So how have provincial officials been responding? It was interesting to hear Danielle Smith say that she spoke with Premier David Eby last night. We will hear from him at 3:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:45 Pacific.
Yeah, you bet, Andrew. And I think looking, kind of pulling back the curtain here, you heard Premier Danielle Smith and Prime Minister Mark Carney talk about, very collaborative language. They say they want this to be a partnership. This is a first step. They really want to work in tandem, trilateral talks, all of these key phrases. And yet, if that's how they want to go about this, the BC government might argue that that's not a very good foot to start off on, because the province here has felt like they've been left out of this conversation pretty much all along. They said they haven't been kept up to speed, that, several times Premier David Eby said that he hadn't been in touch with Ottawa, that it almost felt like BC was being ignored while Ottawa and Alberta went off and had these discussions by themselves. Here's what BC Energy Minister Adrian Dix said yesterday when just asked about it.
This is a $14 million communications exercise by Alberta. And what you get for that are things like MOUs, right? Not projects, not routes, not plans, not markets, but a political agreement based on a political investment. Well, that's not going to move anything forward. In any event, they didn't talk to us about it or other people about it, and that's obviously not helpful. This is not the way to do business.
And so, Andrew, a tricky political dance, not only for the Prime Minister, but also for BC, because, you look back to Premier John Horgan, the Premier of the previous government here, and the tricky, politics they had to play in appeasing all sides, essentially, in getting that Trans Mountain pipeline expansion up and going. So again, we'll see that with this NDP government here in BC, how they will appease their base, their grassroots base, but also be in those negotiations with Ottawa. And I guess at the end of the day, some will ask, can BC be bought? Is a big question. We'll hear, as you said, from the Premier of BC in 2 hours. We'll be standing by for that. Andrew.
Tanya, thank you. The CBC's Tanya Fletcher live in Vancouver. Let's turn now to the CBC's business reporter Anis Hadari for his insight. He joins us live from Calgary. So Anis, we know the energy industry has been watching this announcement very closely. What kind of reaction are we getting from that sector?
We're certainly hearing from oil and gas and energy industry players, both here in Alberta and really around Canada, that this is good news, this is welcome news. A colleague of mine spoke with some of them yesterday, and the way it was phrased then was, this isn't a champagne moment, but maybe it's worth a glass of wine, because this is just the first step in many, many, many more steps to come when it comes to getting a pipeline constructed. So while the energy industry here is reacting with positivity, this is not a done deal. There is no pipeline yet. There's no project for a pipeline yet. This is a memorandum of understanding to then help with future deals. So it's like a plan for another plan for another plan for a deal that actually might mean a shovel in the ground some other time. But companies that want to put those shovels in the ground or move energy products through the pipelines that could eventually be constructed, they're certainly happy with this. The other parts of the Canadian economy where we're hearing some positive vibes here are from manufacturers. We've heard from the Canadian Association of Manufacturers and Exporters. I may have that exact name wrong, but certainly industry representatives for manufacturers are saying this is good news for them, because it could mean that the materials they make get used in the construction of a pipeline. Certainly we're in an ironworkers union lodge here. That's where the Prime Minister was speaking about this in Calgary today. But here's the catch, though. The private sector, these energy, oil and gas companies, they have to get involved as per the terms of this memorandum of understanding. And the Prime Minister was very clear on that earlier today. Take a listen.
If there's not a private sector proponent, there won't be a pipeline.
So, no private proponent, there won't be a pipeline. Basically, if a private sector company isn't going to play ball here and take on this project, it's not going to happen. At least that's what Mark Carney is saying today, Andrew.
So how quickly could we see a pipeline project actually get underway?
I call that the $1 million question, but really we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. And it really relates to what the Prime Minister said in that clip right there. Right now, there is no private sector proponent of this project. There is no private sector company that wants to do it yet. And that's the first step. So it could be years, if not decades, before we see an actual pipeline that is operating and working. It could be years before there's shovels in the ground, because right now there isn't a company that says they want to do that. But what has changed is that, at least when you listen to the government of Alberta and at this point the government of Canada, they are trying to make the regulatory system a little more friendly to companies that might want to do it. And while companies in the oil and gas sector say that's good news, no one has put their hand up to build this yet. So it's impossible to have a timeline that's specific, but we are talking about a lot of years before there is a new pipeline, Andrew.
Thank you. That is the CBC's Anis Hadari live in Calgary. We are anticipating reaction to today's energy agreement. We will take you to the House of Commons foyer live if any MPs pop up to speak before question period. Stay with us here on CBC News Network.